I worry a bit about this current and ongoing generation, about how our young people, who will eventually be middle aged or old people, how they're going to get by in life, how they're going to be self sufficient, because it seems to me that self sufficiency is lost in a lot of domains. Now, if you think about it, when we were younger, as somebody who was born in the 80s, childhood was mostly throughout the 90s, that we didn't have access to Google and AI and all these sort of quick fix things. So we learned stuff by asking other people, from our parents, of course, through life experience and trial and error. And while these different technologies, they're inherently neutral, they can have a lot of positive benefits, but one thing that they take away is a person's overall self-sufficiency. And that's something that, as a parent, I try my best to instill in my kids, and that if you're a parent, if you're raising young ones, you should do the same thing too. I think about a lot of things in my life, how I do them, when I learn how to do them, and I'm not sure. Maybe my mom or my dad taught me at some point. Maybe I just got tired of messing up and I eventually figured it out. Maybe, especially more in my latter years, I how-to'd my way through it through a YouTube video or even maybe a book. But the point is, I figured it out somehow and I got it done. I got to my destination. When I'm driving somewhere and it's unfamiliar, I got there somehow. Maybe I used a map. Maybe I used Google Maps. Maybe I asked somebody for directions. Maybe I look for a familiar landmark or look for a sign. I don't know how it happened, but I got to where that I was trying to go in some way, shape, or form. I do not worry, but I'm concerned a little bit for this generation, because are they going to be able to do that without running and crying to mom and dad? That is, if mom and dad are present and available in their life. One important thing that you have to do as a parent is to teach your kids some self-sufficiency, basic stuff. You're not going to be able to teach your kid every single thing. But that should be the point of it, is that when there are some things that are beyond your area of expertise, those very intricate things, that they should have the baseline of being able to do research, to study, to practice trial and error, to develop boldness enough to ask people for help or ask questions. These are the kind of things that you want to instill in your kids so they have self-sufficiency. If you're always holding them by the hand and doing everything for them, what's going to happen is they're going to turn into teenagers and eventually adults, and they're always going to be dependent on somebody else to take care of it for them. Somebody else clean it up. Somebody else pick it up. Somebody else do this and that. And what's going to happen is other people aren't going to want to be around them. One, because they're hanger-on. Two, because they're immature. And three, because they don't want other people to be having an extra burden. One of my goals, it's a low-key sort of auxiliary goal, but it is important to me, is I've got younger kids, and when they're older, when they reach adulthood, I want them to be in a stable, functional marriage. Then, dang it, I want grandchildren. And I know firsthand that the likelihood of that is going to be very slim if they don't know how to do very basic remedial stuff, such as how to make a basic meal or how to wash themselves or how to do laundry. So little by little, I teach my kids these things as they get older, things that are of their capability level. My son, for example, he's the oldest of my children, but he knows how to do things self-sufficiently, and he's elementary age. He's able to cook, and he's able to, of course, wash and groom himself, and he's able to do laundry. And yeah, I know part of it is, to get them to do some chores, so that's less stuff that me or my wife have to do. But in the long term, teaching him how to take care of himself so he's not a slob and he's not always dependent on somebody. These are the things that you want to teach your kids. I feel comfortable when he's older, let's say, he's in his 20s, 30s or whatever, he's an adult, maybe he moves to a different city, goes to college, gets a job somewhere, or even goes overseas. Who knows what happens? Who knows what God has in store for him? But I'm not going to be worried and fearful that, oh my goodness, he doesn't know how to run a vacuum cleaner. He doesn't know how to wash a dish. He doesn't know how to wash or fold his clothes. He's living like a slob, like a hoarder, and it's going to be awful. Don't worry about that stuff because I'm implementing those seeds of knowledge right now. And again, I'm not saying I'm the greatest expert. I'm not the all-time leader in doing laundry or cooking a meal, but I can handle myself. And again, a lot of it's trial and error. A lot of it's my own research. Even a time before there was Google and these things. If anything, you should be more able to do those things. You just have to know what you're looking for. So instead of spending time looking for TikTok videos and stuff, maybe you should be looking how to cook a meal or looking how to properly fold and put away your laundry. Those are the kind of things that you can be learning in your free time. And those are the kind of things that you can be teaching and talking to your kids about in their free time. How to properly handle themselves as not even just adults, but even as younger people, how to properly handle yourself. But yeah, you want to teach your kids how to be self-sufficient, guys. You don't want them to always be, for lack of a better term, suckling at your teat and you having to treat them like babies. There's some grown people out there. There's a lot of grown people out there that, if the umbilical cord wasn't still attached, you could have fooled me because they're babies. I see too many people in my age group. I'm 40 years old at the time of this video. I see too many people in my age group in their 30s, their 40s, middle aged, that don't know basic things that an adult should be able to handle. They're immature. And then they wonder why, they're still single. They can't find a good mate. Why, they can't handle, basic functions, whether it be with their finances, with their living situation. And you could say like, well, that's all their parents' fault, for not teaching them that kind of stuff. And yeah, there's some validity in that too. I take responsibility of that as the man of the house, as the father. I take responsibility for teaching my kids. So there's some of that. But let's say that somehow got lost in translation. I got friends, I got people that I know that they came from a broken home. Maybe mom wasn't around, dad wasn't around, or some unusual circumstance, whatever. But here's the thing. Society doesn't want to hear that up to a certain point. And especially when you're an adult. When you're 28 years old, 29, 30 years old, your job doesn't want to hear your sob story about how your dad never taught you that, how your mom wasn't there. Your boss wants to know, can you do the job or not? You go to a job interview and they don't want to hear some victimhood stuff about, well, I never learned that growing up because I had such a rough upbringing. Like, no one wants to hear about that. Can you do the job or not? When you go to apply to get an apartment or when you apply to a college, they don't want to hear the woe is me story. They want to know, can you do this or not? And instilling those values of self-sufficiency in your children is going to prevent a lot of turmoil and heartbreak. I'm not saying that everything's going to go perfect, but you want to at least rule out that your children are able to do the basic bare minimum things. I see so many parents that are too gentle with their kids. They're too coddling. They're afraid to challenge their kids. This whole participation trophy society where nobody gets challenged, where nobody has to figure out a problem. As much as I can't stand, and I never could stand homework when I was in school. You remember the math homework where you always had to show your work to the teacher. As much as I revile that, there is some value in being able to have a route, have a technique, have a philosophy to get to the final answer. And that is what self-sufficiency is really all about. Having the ability to figure out and solve problems, and hopefully in a consistent way that can be repeated time and time again. So underrated. Eventually, again, with all these technology, all these technological things and all these breakthroughs, even with that, at some point, the internet's going to be down. Your Wi-Fi is going to lose signal. Google's not going to be available for some reason. It's going to be under maintenance or something like that. That's going to happen to everybody at some point. You know, you're going to be out in a woods or a rural area where you have a lost connection, and you're going to have to be self-sufficient. Car's going to break down at some point. You're going to run out of gas at some point. All these things could happen. Your power's going to go out. Are you going to be self-sufficient? Or are you going to be so dependent on everyone taking care of you and waiting on you hand and foot and crying out how you're a victim and how you're so oppressed and life is so difficult, and hope somebody just sweeps you off your feet? Because if you're going to wait for that, eventually you're going to hit a point where it's not going to happen, and people are either going to laugh at you, walk right over you, or dismiss you, or say, tough luck, buddy, get over it. Parents, again, my final point, my overall point, teach your kids to be self-sufficient. That doesn't mean that you don't care. In fact, it's the opposite. It means that you do care. But teach them to be the kind of person that can cook their own meals, that can drive from point A to point B, that can talk to somebody and ask for a request, ask for help, that can do a job interview. Make sure your kids are self-sufficient. You know, or otherwise you'll have the nightmare. This is the nightmare that I've had, that my kids are, 38 years old, still living in my basement, eating Hot Pockets and playing video games and not doing anything to contribute to society because they're not self-sufficient. Don't live that nightmare. I'm doing whatever I can to avoid that nightmare. Parents, fathers, I hope you're doing the same thing. Teach your kids to be self-sufficient. All right, guys. God bless. Peace.